Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, robot, and loin streamer. Today's video is going to be a book review or book discussion of Alexa Donne's new book, Pretty Dead Queens, coming out October 4th of this year. Check it out if you haven't already, and just so you know up front, this is going to be a full-on spoiler book talk because I want to talk about the elements of the book. So if you don't want it to be spoiled for you, do not watch this video. If you have read the book and you want to get more in-depth discussion of the plot, of the elements, maybe see if we have some things in common, then stick around. That's usually what I look for in book reviews, and I'm often very disappointed when the reviews are vague. So before we get started, just a couple of things. Number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. If you have books that you would like to see me review or talk about on the channel, you can always feel free to suggest those and I'll see what I can do. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. Lamoille and Fresh Meat Feature are the places to go. And number three, if you would like to roast my books, those are all available at your favorite book locations. I have one coming out October 31st myself. Second book in the Bodymore trilogy. First one is currently available if you got to catch up to get ready for the second, but it's going to be a good time. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Now, I didn't go into this book hoping that I would hate it, but I went in knowing that I don't necessarily like Alexa Donne's writing style. I don't like her authorial POV, so I figured that it wouldn't really be my thing, and I was correct. I was still giving her a chance, and now that I've read 3 out of 4 of her currently available books, I think after this one I am Alexa Donne reading her, unless one of you guys really wants me to read it or I need the views. But I'm not into her style, and even with this book I kind of figured as much, but I also needed to see if Alexa was going to pair villain monologue with recording for the 3rd book in a row. We'll get back to that. So to not put this in delicate words, comparing the 3 books that I have read by Alexa, she likes to create central characters who are sociopathic cunts who get everything that they want and no one asks them questions. You see this with both Leo and Olivia in her previous books, The Stars We Steal and The Ivies. Since I've never read Brightly Burning, I can't tell you anything about that main character, but you see a lot of the same flaws in the other 2 characters, and the character of this book feels very much like those 2 characters, though I think Leo had a hotter temper, and I think Cecilia, the main character of Pretty Dead Queens, is much closer to Olivia. So Alexa does write flawed main characters, but they're not recognized for their flaws, which makes it seem like their flaws are not actually flaws. Character flaws are awesome when you're creating a story. They create complex characters and difficulties. When the character's trying to achieve their wants and goals, it creates complications, it creates strife and conflict because people want different things and it just gets in the way, and often you end up hurting somebody by accident. The problem with Alexa's characters is that they're so insanely flawed in selfish ways, but they bend reality to give them everything that they want and need at any given time when they want it. No one ever distrusts these central characters, even when they should. No one really stands in their way to get what they want. Let's look at the cops in this one, and they solve all of the problems that are sent their way literally just by getting in the room alone with the villain so that they can monologue for no apparent reason, but that's enough to convict them apparently. So in this novel, you don't get 1 villain monologue. Oh, no. You get 2 for the price of 1. 2 full villain monologues, which make these characters so indistinguishable because they all act the same. They're literally mannequins, carbon copies of the same thing. The only thing that makes them different is whatever demographic title Alexa wants to put on them. So Cecilia, the MC, doesn't have any dirt on any of these bad guys that start monologuing. She doesn't have to force the info out of any of them. They're literally just alone in a room. They transform into evilness in the face, and then they vomit. And then they vomit information that there wasn't even evidence of. They just tell her everything, to which she turns around to the cops and says, I know that they're the bad guys. Just trust me on this one, they told me. So I'm going to get back to this when I'm getting into the criticisms of this book, because it feels like I'm just setting the stage for what we're about to go through with the plot synopsis. But FYI, you can't press charges on hearsay. And the way this book ends wouldn't result in charges because it is suspicious as frick. I'll end up repeating myself if I go on any more than I already am. So we'll get into that later. And if you don't want spoilers, again, don't watch this video because I'm going to get into all of the spoils because I want to have conversations with you guys, whether you've read the book or not, about the elements of this book. I want to talk about the specifics of this book with you, especially if you've read it. So before we get into any of that, let's do the briefest synopsis we can so that I can give you just what we're dealing with. The novel starts out with Cecilia moving in with her grandmother in an apparent small town in California. She wanders around the house and into her Grammy's study, ending on reading one of her Grammy's books because her Grammy is a mystery writer. This book details the drowning of a girl, which we already know is foreshadowing because of the synopsis of this book that is made public. From here, Cecilia goes to school and meets a wide range of characters. Also, a couple of side characters are described in detail to the point that it's kind of weird that they're highlighted, never to come up ever again. During lunch, Cecilia learns about the murder that took place on campus 50 years ago, the one that inspired the novel that she read by her Grammy just the other night. Cecilia returns home and learns that there's a local writing conference for her Grammy's books and their fan club in the next coming days. She also meets her Grammy's assistant, Ben, a boy her age, and Susan, an older woman who lives in a house out back and assists Graham full-time. Cecilia's immediately taken by Ben. She has dinner, laments her life, and then goes to look at more of her Grammy's books. Back at school, Cecilia learns more about the drama between her classmates since they live in a small town, so there's no way that people don't have issues with each other. That's just small town politics and drama. This includes Ben having issues with the mayor and blaming the mayor for his mother's death. People who used to date each other, a lot of backstabbing, some gossip going on. She goes on a tour of the school with the other kids, and there's a mannequin in the pool that Cecilia thinks is drowning at the time, but she just ends up making a fool of herself when everyone laughs at her for jumping in the pool to try to save the mannequin. Later, she goes on a tour of the town, learning about the 50-year-old murder and ending at the school again for a reenactment of the murder scene because this entire town's identity is wrapped around a murder from 50 years ago. Not joking. I guess by saying that, nothing ever really does happen here. Both times Cecilia responded to the body in the water, Ben stands up for her against his classmates who are laughing at her. After the tour, Ben returns Cecilia to her home for a welcoming party that her grandma set up, and the rich people all complain about the costs of college and also do sneering about how much they hate each other, but put up with each other because reasons. Cecilia escapes the snobbery by going into the kitchen where she runs into Gabriel, a dude that she met during the school tour. He hates the tour because he feels like it's exploitive. They exchange some pleasantries and he cheers Cecilia up because she's grieving the loss of her mother and she's kind of having a breakdown, and he uses bad jokes and ice cream to lift her spirits. There's bonding, important to know that they are bonding. That's interrupted by a fight breaking out in the other room. Ben has now socked the mayor and he's just taken out of the house. Cecilia tries to comfort Ben by asking him to homecoming. That seems kind of like a big deal considering she's been there for like 2 days. But already she's fitting in and just asking dudes out, so whatever. The speed at which she's accepted in this small town, I think, kind of defeats the feeling of it being a small town and her being a small town outsider, because she's immediately welcomed in as basically one of them. There's no distrust, there's no suspicion. She's just kind of like, welcome to the friend group. Cecilia's then forced into therapy by her grandma. Ben doesn't like it and warns her about the cessery of the town therapist, but then she gets all indignant about how she cares about mental health unlike him. Cecilia returns to the school and looks for Ben so that she can apologize, but he's not there, so she texts him. Ben's not mad, just says that he's busy today with some other things. Natalia, the daughter of the therapist, then takes Cecilia to her mother's therapy. She is the only therapist in town. After the session, Cecilia hangs out with Natalie upstairs and feels inadequate. Where I said Natalia before, it was Natalie, sorry. She then goes to a homecoming ball game with everyone, where she sees more small town politics and relationships play out. She slips away to pee during the break, but with the line, she runs off to the pool area to use that bathroom instead. There, she finds the corpse of Natalie drowned in the pool where the mannequin used to be. So at this point, we're about 1/3 of the way through the book, and nothing has happened except for this and the repetition of the 2 murder scenes. But in general, it felt like an episode of Degrassi because it was all just relationship stuff with nothing happening, and it felt, yeah, it was kind of a slog to get here, but we'll talk about that later when I'm talking about pacing. Cecilia checks her grandma's books to see how the murder is described, to see what she saw, to see if somebody was maybe doing a copycat murder. She wonders if this is the same killer from 50 years ago, or if this was inspired by the book or by the kill itself and is somebody completely different. I'd like to think it's more the town that inspired the kill than the grandma's books, considering the town flaunts the murder as its entire identity and is more likely than Grammy's books. That'd just be my guess. Cecilia assumes that her grandma's books have more power than the town's identity. Cecilia then wonders if a superfan did the murder, reenacting a crime from her grandma's books. I think this is a really dumb area for this to have all gone, because it doesn't make any sense, and all it does is make the MC run into a conference for her Grammy's books, bugging fans of her Grammy's work after we'd just met an entirely different cast that had to do with a small town. Again, we're already expanding from what was supposed to be like a small town, or what was sold as a small town murder mystery. Well, now we're kind of going more international with this conference, and it actually felt like two different books that could have been here in this series, with Cecilia being this problem solver. I'll get into that again later, I think. But I just don't think the conference thing was needed, and it was distracting. So get ready for a brand new cast of characters that she and Ben investigate together. This includes con-goers, hotel workers, and cops. We've also got some throwbacks to the guy in jail from the murder 50 years ago who got blamed. While most of this isn't important enough to go through bit by bit, I will say that Cecilia keeps showing up where the cops are. They keep seeing her. They keep warning her to back off and to not make a mess of the investigation. And when they catch her doing stuff, their warnings are toothless. Then they take her to the station, where you'd think they'd ask her about why she keeps interrupting with possible witnesses and crime scenes, but instead they straight up assume that she's innocent and just ask her about the time that she saw the body. Then they leave her alone in the station, where they apparently have a giant murder board with connectors and like witnesses and ideas all over it that Cecilia just walks by, and it's so unguarded that Cecilia can just take pictures with her camera of an ongoing investigation. There is so much mishandling here that nothing would ever come of this, because these people are so incompetent that you couldn't press charges because everything was contaminated. So the entire investigation is handled with this same level of incompetence that there is no way any charges would ever stick by the end of it because of the contamination of everything. There are other issues on where this ends, but dude, I know that you need to suspend disbelief for a kid cop or kid mystery story, but this asks for too much, which is the point that the entire precinct and the investigation is a sham. And why even bother warning the main character if she will never face any kind of consequences, if she'll never be locked up, if she'll never get in trouble, if there is never anything to get in her way? There is no reason for them to be like, hey, stay out of there. And then they just continually let her be there. I should also mention that one of Cecilia's classmates works at the precinct and actively leaks information of this active investigation outside of the police station, and specifically to Cecilia, as if this, again, isn't going to corrupt the entire investigation and make it impossible to press charges. The only way that this works is if the entire town is literally that corrupt that you can spread information and just frame people, and you do not follow any sort of code. I mean, maybe this is just the Chicago of small towns. But then why do I care if the cops actually catch the killer? Because everybody here sucks. This is among the most annoying things in Alexa's books, and I'll talk about that at the end. Moving on in the story, we get to a lot of random misdirection that doesn't really implicate anyone. This includes a text from one kid that's saying, "I'll fucking kill you." No one actually texts that to their friends in all seriousness if they're gonna kill somebody, and it's laughable that Cecilia would see that text and think, oh my god, he's admitted to wanting to commit a crime. It's no different than Johnny Depp's text of frustration saying that he was going to burn and fuck the corpse just to make sure that it's dead. There was no teeth on this, and it read just like an attempt to misdirect the reader, and a weak attempt at that. Cecilia spends time chatting theories with Ben. He gets jealous of the time Cecilia mentions her flirting with Gabe, but also Ben kind of comes off as a cuck throughout this, and Cecilia likes that because she's kind of a bitch who doesn't care about other people's feelings. That sounds too familiar. Cecilia uses fake tears to get out of class so that she can spy on kids talking to cops when they come to school for interviewing. This is another issue that I'll talk about later because, no, this wouldn't happen. Unless the entire town is corrupt pieces of shit. But also a good moment to show that Cecilia is a complete sociopath pretending tears so that she can go and get dirt on people. You'll find that throughout the book, too. Eventually, she returns to her therapist's office for a meeting, but when the cops are talking to her therapist, she goes to the computer to try to get information on other people. The computer's locked, but no worries. It takes Cecilia all of 2 seconds to guess that the password is the therapist's birthday that is publicly posted on all of the therapist's public professional pages. Yeah. Everything in this story requires everyone around Cecilia to either be a moron or totally inept in everything that they do. So she gets the info, then sneaks upstairs to Natalie's room and gets on Natalie's computer. Natalie is the dead chick, in case we've forgotten at this point. She learns Natalie's been collecting blackmail materials through her mom's therapy sessions where she put up a camera. And fortunately for her, you've got Natalie writing out exactly what she thinks of everyone, what she knows about them, what she doesn't know about them, when she doesn't have enough blackmail material, when she's not sure if she's going to use the black material on people. And she's conveniently put it right there where it's easy to find, likely even titled Blackmail Stuff, lol, I'm an evil bitch, because Cecilia finds it right away without even trying. No password protection, not hidden in folders, nothing. I mean, you could have at least called it Bible stuff to seem boring and then stuck it in a folder of homework, but nah, let's just make this super easy and obvious. Cecilia also is given a spare key to the school by one of her classmates, I think it was Morgan, because they all apparently have keys, and Morgan just hands it over when asked a couple of questions, because everything just works out in Cecilia's favor. That's how we get from point A to point B. Cecilia returns to Ben, tells him about the blackmail. Then Ben says that he tried to warn Cecilia, but she's still mad that he didn't just straight up say blackmail, even if she wasn't going to believe him if he had. The two of them continue their investigation into the older crime from 50 years ago. In the middle of doing all of this research, Cecilia also uses her new blackmail information on different students and classmates that she has in order to get the information that she wants, which includes threatening her classmate Luke for no apparent reason because she needs to do a power play and Cecilia's always got to be the baddest bitch wherever she is, and since he's got her in a car and was asking her questions, no. Cecilia is the only one that's allowed to grill people. Anybody that grills her, even if she's lied to you and you caught her in a lie, she is going to bite your tongue off, and not in a sexy way. In the middle of all of this happening, she then goes to Natalie's wake. She's been at this place she's been living in this new town for not very long at all. I don't even think it's been a week, maybe 2 weeks, but maybe my timeline is off. I'll accept that. But she goes to Natalie's wake, which honestly I don't think is appropriate anyway, since she only knew Natalie for like 2 or 3 days before Natalie was killed. But that's all glossed over when Cecilia has a meltdown and starts snapping blackmail materials at the people at the wake, specifically targeting the dead girl's parents, and the mayor, since he's sleeping with one of Cecilia's classmates. She leaves in tears. Way to make someone else's death about you, girl. The next day, Ben shows up at Cecilia's house to take her to homecoming because he ain't mad at her at all. When they get to the dance, it turns out that no one is mad at her for what she did, and instead all of her friends come up to her and clap, and they're so amazed because she is so brave, and oh my gosh, can't believe that you had the blackmail materials and you just stood up to all the bullies and shouted them, and absolute bravery. Girl, did you know that you can seriously do no wrong? Girl, please take a standing ovation. Morgan's not even mad that you took away her elder fuck buddy, who was the mayor. Even she was clapping for Cecilia. Cecilia then gets a random text message to go to the pool by herself, triggering some major deja vu right now. And of course, because Cecilia is next level genius, and because she's aware there's a killer running around, she 100% goes to the pool all by herself, because she knows she's never actually in any danger. Gabriel is waiting there for her. She freaks out, runs to Ben. Ben takes her away to an abandoned house for them to hang out at until morning, when she can call the cops, because for some reason, somehow, the cops are closed. They try the phone number and the cops aren't answering, and apparently they can't call emergency numbers, so Ben is just like, well, we'll just go hang out at my mom's old house that I don't live in anymore because she died. And even though there's a killer around, it totally makes sense to just come to my abandoned house because the cops are closed. Yeah, none of this makes sense to me either. So the two of them go to Ben's old house, they have sex, and it feels really forced. When Ben goes off to pee, Cecilia is now suspicious of Ben. Then she says that she needs to pee, and for some reason, Ben takes her to the second-story toilet because it's the only one that hasn't been used yet, apparently, because that upstairs is hanging halfway off a cliff and it's missing a wall, and it's better she risk falling while she shimmies over to the bathroom than possibly looking in a toilet at where Ben has already shat. Like, think about that for a second. Ben would prefer that this chick almost die instead of seeing his shit. And Cecilia doesn't question it. So in Ben's mother's room, Cecilia now learns for sure that Ben did the murders because he admits it in a villain's monologue that is not even prompted, but she gets suspicious, and then he gets a face that's a distorted jack-o'-lantern face, as tends to happen when you just have a sus thought and the villain is near, and then they're like, "Oh, you caught me in my plans. You knew all along. Well, now I have to explain everything to you now, don't I?" That's pretty much what happened to Ben. Even though he had literally no reason to tell her anything. So they have a fight scene. He falls off of the broken floor of the house. She tries to pull him back up. The other kids from school and the cops come out of nowhere, it seemed, and they help him up. And they're going to arrest Ben now because even though all of the other kids said he had an alibi, they're now changing their story to say that they lied for him. And Cecilia says, "He told me that he did it. Just trust me, he did it." And that's enough to get him arrested with no evidence. So mark that as one villain monologue as evidence with no recording. Cecilia then returns home after her obviously long night. She's comforted by Grandma, who, in a split second, also amazingly turns evil because suddenly Cecilia was suspicious of her Grammy, and her Grammy was like,
"Oh no, you figured me out. Well, now I have no choice but to tell you exactly what happened, not only to that girl 50 years ago, but let me tell you about the murder of my husband. And let me tell you about all of these other murders that you weren't even questioning and didn't even know of, because I killed more people to write my mystery novels. I'm just going to monologue you about to all of that, and then I'm going to attack you, you dumb skanky bitch."
And that's pretty much what happens with Grandma. The two of them fight. Then Cecilia pushes Grandma down into a dumbwaiter or an elevator where Grandma theoretically perishes, but we don't have necessarily that confirmation. Then Superfan from the conference shows up and says that she's actually an FBI agent, though she did genuinely love Grandma's books. She's also in the FBI and has been tracking Grammy Graham for a while now, and will continue to look into the mysteries behind the murders that have kind of been tied to her a little bit. After all of that is said and done, all's well that ends well. Cecilia doesn't want to live in her Graham's house anymore, but will do that for the rest of her high school career. The FBI agent offers to get her into UC Irving so that she can become an FBI agent in the future, because everything is about connections and Cecilia's got them. Also, Cecilia is like, hell yeah, I'm gonna chase death, and that is the end of the story. So now you know almost as much as I know. Still go and read it and pick up things that I did not share. Getting into the individual responses of the things that I want to talk about with this book. First, I'm going to say my total personal pet peeve, and that's that I hate it when someone starts out their creative project with their inspiration. I hated it when people did it on Gaia Online, which is where my writing started, and every time I go back, you see even more and more of this, where they explain at the top of their roleplay that this is where they got their inspiration from, and like half of the time they're like, boredom and a TV show. I hate it in the front of novels, especially when it's emotional, because it feels like emotional manipulation to sell a book. Why Not Wichita, which I reviewed on this channel, also started out with an essay of the inspiration for the story and the character, and like, I feel that since the story hasn't even started yet, get me into the story, get me curious about the inspiration, get me curious about what you were going through when you're talking about this by telling me the story, and then once I'm invested in you and the story, then I'll want to read this other stuff. The thing that stood out with me with Why Not Wichita is because it was a novella, the entire look inside was just the essay about the character, and I didn't actually get to see the writing, and that bugged me as well. So I did not like that Alexa put a thing in the front of this book about grieving for her mother. I understand that it sucks. I understand that I might come off like a psychopath, that I just don't want this when I'm looking at the front of my book, but I don't think that it's appropriate for the front of a book when you're selling a product like this. It feels smarmy to me. But I know that other people don't have a problem with this, so to each their own, I just wanted to bring up that specific peeve. So the next thing I want to mention are the glaring similarities between Alexa's work. Now, as an author, especially as you write more and more stuff, you're always going to have continuing themes, and you're going to have things that you're constantly drawn to continually write about. Like, Bret Easton Ellis constantly is writing about richer kids and people raised in that yuppie culture because that's what he cares about. You'll see a lot of the similar themes across my books. I know that I also like to take like a poor person and put them in a lot of like receiving money position or to be around rich people to see just how smarmy and psychopathic the rich class is. And so I know I know that I can do that. It's not in everything because Joey's not around anybody that's rich, but this isn't a ding on Alexa for having similar things between books. They just sort of happen. You're going to have aesthetics that you're drawn to, but I did want to compare a couple of things since that is one of the reasons why I picked up her book. Number one, we've got 3 novels with pools and drowning involved. 2 novels where the MC is drawn to the pool by someone saying, hey, come alone, and they do, despite knowing that there's a murderer afoot. 3 novels with poor or underprivileged girls being thrust into the riches. To be fair, I also do this, like I said, I also do this a lot with rich versus poor dynamic, but I do it in a completely different way, sometimes even satire. With like Joey in Bodymore, her last name is Bourgeois, and she lives in a rundown trailer park, so I get it. We're always going to have our things. Another similarity between these is we have the snobby bitchy cunt who gets everything that she wants and no one questions what she is doing or penalizes her for being a bitch or being places that she shouldn't be. And we have villain monologues. Though this one got away from recording the villain monologues, but that sort of defeats the purpose of the villain monologue as evidence of wrongdoing. Because when you have an admission of guilt, you need to have it recorded for it to count as a confession, because somebody telling you something and then telling somebody else that they told me this is not evidence that you can convict on. However, I think in this story, it would have been a problem to try to do the recording thing because California is a 2-party consent state. So even if Cecilia had recorded the villain monologues, it couldn't be admitted in court as evidence to convict either of these people, because neither of them would have been theoretically informed of them being recorded. So without the recording, the monologues seem kind of silly. Okay, I mentioned this during the synopsis. We're going to talk about pacing. Chapter 1 definitely felt rushed and slow at the same time. Rushed because it was filled with information and trying to get the setting and background with Cecilia and her grandma just right, but slow because for the first third of the book, nothing happens that makes it a thriller or a mystery. I was sold this as a mystery, but literally nothing happens for a full third of the book. It felt like the novel was dragging on, so I went to look at what the typical beats are for a thriller or mystery, and usually they include the inciting incident or the murder by 12% of the story. And now I'm not saying that you have to hit that every single time, and Lord knows how by the market Alexa was going with this. Like maybe she wasn't writing it for the market but was trying to do something more artistic. Maybe it really didn't matter, but the structure of this really dragged for me, and it was enough that I noticed and I went to look it up. So we got 2 zero tension false flags before anything actually happened, and I was bored. There was also the center sag after that because we actually felt like we were getting into what would have been another book entirely with the book conference. Quite frankly, I think that actually would have been a better option if you just made this a book 2, because then the first one could have been with the current year murder and the other one with the grandma, which I think also would have been an interesting way to build this into a serial if you wanted to, and to allow the conference to be the main focus in another book. Mixing the conference together with the small town drama really just distracted from this being a small town murder mystery and created an entirely new large cast that we really didn't need to know because they were all literally just false flags. And we wasted a fourth of the book with all of these false flags that weren't worth following. I think it also would have been better if the story dug into the small town vibe and built the quirky characters and the personality of the small town first, rather than introducing a secondary segment that only existed really to put Cecilia's grandma on a chopping block later and to try to confuse the reader in a really cheap way. If we had focused more on sinking into the bizarre new world that was the small town that Cecilia was an outsider for, and given that small town its own personality and built into that weirdness, that tension that she should have felt when she was around all of these other characters that had this history that she didn't have, that wanted to keep her locked out because she wasn't a part of them, or to win them to her side so when the truth came out about whatever drama it was, they already had her on their side. That would have been interesting. But instead, we spend so much time going through all of these different characters that they're just a glob of the same person. Pop culture references. So these were placed often and they felt out of place. The writing in this gave off this strange energy of a single white female of around 35 to 40 trying to fit in with younger people going, hello, my fellow kids. Do what you gotta do, I get it, but it didn't feel natural to me, not through dialogue and not through narration. Okay. I don't have a better way to describe this section, so it is just called OMG, the painful force of strong woman. Trademark. A handful of times in this book, a male character defended the female character, and as if it was a conditioned response, and the narration said, I love that so much even if it is regressive, or I think that's cute if it wasn't so misogynistic. Just accept that you as the narrator like being taken care of by a man. You don't have to hate it that men find you valuable enough and worthy of protection. But it felt so pathological in the way it was described and used in this book, like the author couldn't help herself but shit talk men every time the man in the story found that the woman he was with was worth something, that he valued her life. The author couldn't just let the character appreciate that men appreciated this character, and she had to disparage them every single time, even though she liked it. Because what's a strong female character if you don't shit on men all the time? What's a strong female character if you don't overpower men all the time? What is a strong female character if you don't just humiliate men all the time and put them in their place? That is the mindset that I absolutely hate. If your female character has to disparage, or your author has to disarm and humiliate and destroy male characters in order for the female character to look strong, your female character is not strong, and you're a misandrist. Here's an example from the text. Normally, the chivalrous hero routine would get on my nerves, but right in this moment, I was grateful for Ben's defense, charmed that he is protecting me. This comment was not even necessary. Just let the character enjoy being cared for because you know you want to. Somehow, though, this feels more like political messaging that has to happen for whatever reason. Or, again, it's pathological with the author that she can't just let these characters enjoy who they are. It's smarmy messaging, and casual man-hate is stupid, and I will call it out every time. I freaking hate it, unless your character is supposed to be a misandrist. But the casual man-hating from multiple POVs just makes me think that it is not the character who hates men. So, characters. This one, the only one that matters to talk about in this really is the main character, Cecilia. Mostly because there are a billion side characters that you don't get to spend much time with at all, so they kind of blend together. Cecilia is not unlike the main characters from Alexa's other two books that I've read, Leo and Olivia. They're outsiders who come in, who whine and scream and break all the rules, but everyone loves them anyway, and they can do no wrong. Cecilia, for me, was insufferable because she knew that she could behave however she wanted with the author's approval and face no consequences. So she did whatever it is that she wanted to do. She took away any possibility of tension because she knew that this character wouldn't even get reprimanded by the people that she cares about when she was a jerk to them. Instead, everyone just gave her a clap or excused everything that she did and never threatened to cut her off, to back off, to put her in timeout, arrest her for contempt, whatever have you. This character was smarter than everyone, better than everyone, had more gall than everyone, and was immediately trusted by everyone in this small town, even as an outsider. This is something that really bothered me back with the Ivies, where you had Olivia, who was supposed to be part of this mean girl crew that nobody trusted because they were backstabbing people all the time. But as soon as Olivia started going around asking questions about her murdered friend, everyone answered. Everyone was like, Olivia, you're not like the other girls, and we trust you, and here is all of this information to help you find this is what we know. No one in the small town was ever skeptical of Cecilia as an outsider, despite her grandma theoretically being this mystery writer, that it would have been funny or interesting if the mystery writer her was kind of quirky, was kind of bizarre, because writers are kind of bizarre, so maybe make her mildly suspicious or a weirdo, even though she brings attention to the town by being a famous writer. There were so many opportunities there that were not played with. No one questioned that Cecilia arrived a day or two before someone died. No one was suspect that because her Grammy had all of this attention, Cecilia wanted to do something to be noticed herself. She was grieving, after all. There were so many options that this could have played with. And then, as she was butting head with the investigators, looking guilty as frick as she meddled, no one questioned her. No one reprimanded her. No one put her in jail for a little while. It was too unbelievable, and it sucked out any stakes that this book could have had, which I think is really bad when it's a thriller mystery and there's supposed to be tension. But there's very little that I hate more than a story where the world doesn't actually respond to the actions of the character. Like, it's all an amusement park ride that's going on in the same place every time, and everyone's just a cardboard cutout that pops out when prompted, but it doesn't really matter because the character is going to go where they're going to go regardless of how anybody around them responds. It's why these books also end with an unprompted monologue as the only evidence of wrongdoing, because the characters aren't active, the characters aren't actually smart, and everything just lines up to expose whatever for the main character with really minimum effort. I think it would have helped Cecilia if she wasn't so catty and bitchy and mean from the start, especially in her snide comments about the male characters. But at this point, like I said, it just feels reactionary and bitter on the author's part forever and always, seeing very little good in the men that adore her other than the ones that she can dominate because she thinks they're dumb. Cecilia also read like a completely unempathetic psycho to me when she's not only abusing others and threatening others with blackmail, but she had no qualms with lying and pretending to cry just to get the things that she wanted. There's nothing about this person that's good. She's just the central character, so you're by default supposed to root for her, and since everyone else likes her, you're also supposed to like her. Alternatively, she judged Natalie for blackmailing people while constantly blackmailing people with the same information throughout the remainder of the book once she found the blackmail material. Then she drops everyone's secret at the wake, and yeah, she's not a good person. The other two characters I'll briefly mention are Maura and Ben, that is the main character's grandma, and then Ben, the love interest, neither of which had any reason to express their guilt to Cecilia. She didn't have them backed into a corner. She didn't have any evidence. It was just, this is my time to shine. And then they transformed into demented jack-o'-lanterns. That description was used for Ben, and pathologically expressed their guilt before Cecilia took them down. Also, note all characterizations were completely gone in order to fit the plot or to make sassy references. This is just a weak writer problem. I went through this in 2014 and 2015 when I was working on my thesis, and I had to learn how to pull back the snark and to not just head hop and not to water down the narration just to make jokes and snide remarks. That's what I went through with The Dead End Drive, which is a very snarky book. But I learned how to focus the narration, to craft that narration, and to allow the characters to be themselves. And maybe some will be snarky in certain ways, but others in different ways or not at all. And that's how you balance that out. This book just let everything be watered down so that people could snark whenever they wanted to snark, which meant nobody had any unique personalities. I don't know why, but this section is called Still. I'm nowhere near the target audience for this book, but that aside, I hate that the guys in this book are passive, that the MC is completely the forward one, but if you like your women in control trope, then you'll probably be down for this. I just absolutely hate this control over all super powerful woman that has to shit on all men and be better than all men because that's apparently what woman empowerment means. This is just how Alexa writes, though, specifically with her enjoyment of humiliation and subjugation of the male characters, and it happens all the time. Another thing, since this kind of has that Degrassi at the beginning, this also might appeal to those who enjoy slice of life YA with a side of murder, because that's what this really read like to me. If you like Karen McManus, then you might like this, but I also didn't like the two Karen McManus books that I read. I've reviewed those on this channel if you are curious about my opinions on those. Honestly, none of it makes sense, and it's a power fantasy for a girl who automatically fits in where she goes, gets everything that she wants, and that includes two boys pitching a tent for her the minute that she meets them. One of them is the ultimate bad boy, since he's got blood on his hand, and the other one sells pot. So, we know where your interests are, girl. This section is called What the Frick Is This Cringe? And these are just segments of dialogue from this book that were so egregious, I'd like to share them with you. Number 1. Shit. Sorry, that was rude. It was? Yeah. Reducing you to just a pretty girl? If either my sister or Amber were here, I'd get an earful about it. It's okay, I say, though his words reassure me that if there's one friend I'd chosen well thus far, it's Bronte's. Amber too. Just don't whip out a fedora and start calling me m'lady and we're good. Because I have a type. Yeah, the bad boy. The bad boy pot seller, possible criminal. We know. Though I did wonder if this was her way of saying she like the bad boy who was disrespectful. Gabriel just dried Cecilia out like the Sahara with that one line. Also, we're going to run out of roles. I'll have to explain, and it'll come out of my wages. Fuck, he blanches. Sorry, I mean damn. I'm not some delicate maiden. You can say fuck in front of me, because she thinks that she is so badass. This is not badass. This is not what a badass looks like. And it just feels like somebody trying too hard to be cool, like the cool mom, and it's just cringe. Also, when it said confusion looks good on him, again, we just want to humiliate the boys, call the boys stupid, and then be like, I think it's attractive when I'm smarter than everybody because I'm a bitch. Also, Ben hovers close, ready to play protector. If it wasn't so regressive, I'd find it cute. That was one of those that I wanted to give you. Also, this is where I think it's more of an intrinsic issue than it's specifically Cecilia, who is a misandrist. We've got Cecilia, this is my boss Elaine. She owns Hotel Seaview. And it took every male family member dying for this to happen, she says. Fuck the patriarchy. This wasn't even necessary. Like, this character showed up once, maybe twice. That line wasn't necessary. We didn't need her to fuck all men, like, in a not sexy way. Why? Why include stuff like this? It's just mean. It's mean-spirited. The whole book is mean-spirited. It feels like the Ivies was mean-spirited. It felt like Leo was mean-spirited. And that's one of the reasons why I'm probably never going to read Alexa Donne again, because her books are just mean-spirited. And I wonder if she's okay or if she's suffering, because this feels like somebody who is miserable. Moving on, the next is the stereotype red herrings. Obviously, literally everyone in this book is a red herring because the option of who the killer was gonna be was always limited to the straight white boy, Ben. But Gabe being a stereotype of a non-white drug dealer the cops were trying to steal money from, that was, okay, if that's where you want to go with that. Also, because I have to bring this up, Luke had some secret that he was bi and banging one of the other dudes in his school actively. That was the blackmail that Natalie had on him. He said that he wasn't going to come out until he left his town. He said he wasn't going to come out until he left the town because of prejudice against him. But he's literally in a friends group with two lesbians who are out and proud and kissing in public, and they don't get any shit. So, like, trying to perpetuate this thing where this small town has a thing against gays while also your friends groups are out and gay and there's no prejudice that shows throughout the story is stupid, and it doesn't make any sense. When you do something like this, it just feels like defaulting on something topical, insanely uncreative, and nonsensical in the development of your small town. Speaking of the structure of this book, should be noted that there is no external conflict moving the story forward. The MC doesn't want anything, isn't doing anything, and has no drive. She only barely, vaguely wants to solve this murder, and it's not for any personal reasons whatsoever. She's just kind of bored, and she's like, why not? It would have been better if she had personal reasons tied to why she wanted to solve this murder, like specifically much more pulled in to distract her from the death of her mother, or that it brought it too close to home that her mother just died and she needed to do this, or her grandma was getting in trouble, or people at school were rejecting her because they were suspicious of her, so she needed to solve this so she could make friends. Anything that would have made her driven, but she was not driven. There was no external conflict or internal conflict really to solve. It was just, she is doing this because she needs to do this because I need a story. The time you have been waiting for. My problem with the cops in this book. There's a handful of issues here with how law enforcement was handled with literally zero research, even the bare minimum. Oh my gosh. I wondered if she was even trying, if the editors of this were even trying. I don't want to hear anybody complain anywhere about, oh, the misrepresentation of this or that until crap like this is all fixed. Everybody gets misrepresented in literally everything. You're not special. So let's talk about this. First thing, minors can't talk to cops without parents, guardians, or representation present. The parents must be informed. Cops can't talk to them, and schools cannot facilitate interviews with minors without parents being informed. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen, and none of that is admissible in court if you learned anything from it. The cops showing up at the school and dragging kids out of class to talk to them in private would never happen, unless your entire town is entirely corrupt. Second thing, Alexa puts in yet another book that her characters assume silence or lack of cooperation with the cops equals guilt. Stonewalling is what guilty people do, is what this book said. In reality, you don't talk to cops without representation. Ever. It's not what guilty people do. It's what smart people do. And I'm only bringing this up because this is a huge misunderstanding with a lot of regular people. I have a feeling that this is not being mentioned in here because the character is uninformed. I think it's in here because the author may be uninformed. But either way, I'm going to clear up this. Silence with the cops is not guilt. It is in your rights that your silence cannot be used against you as a sign of guilt. If somebody does that in court, it is a reprimand on the prosecution. So, yeah, the more you know. And then third thing, how are there zero ramifications for Cecilia and Amber leaking information out from this actively investigated case? There is no way that the entire town was not gossiping over the leaked information that would then ruin the investigation. By the way, by telling potential witnesses things that they shouldn't know and contaminating everything. All of this would destroy any hope of a real investigation or an arrest. But there are no repercussions for anything that either Amber or Cecilia do to ruin this case. The cops in this are either so incompetent that nothing matters, or they are so corrupt that I don't want to see anybody win in this, because you know that they've falsely accused and arrested a lot of people on the whims of the random townspeople that just point and say they done it. With the way that this book is set up, everything is acceptable when at the end of the day you can just point your finger and say guilty and the cops will haul you off on word alone. This is so bad that that is the conclusion. Really? Is this Alexa's doing, or is this the editors / publication company's doing? Because this doesn't even look like it had a developmental editor. It doesn't even look like it had a critique partner. If that is how the story is ending, you just point and click and say, take them away, boys, with no evidence, with nothing. There is not enough suspension in the world to hold my disbelief if I wanted to enjoy this story. I am sorry. Next is the lack of tension. I don't know how you write an entire mystery novel with no tension, but here we are. Okay, never mind. The way to do this is to make literally no one suspicious of the outsider once the murder happens immediately after she gets there. What actually makes this worse is the fact that Maura, who was a suspect of a 50-year-old murder to the point that the FBI were investigating her. There must have been rumors about her dying husband too, and people around her dying, and all of her writing mystery books, but literally no one was suspicious of Maura or Cecilia, or the town wasn't helping hide all of these murders so that they could make money, so that they could make this identity, so that they could bring in tourists and tourist money. Like, there were so many rich opportunities to either have this be a small town like Glam that all worked together, that Cecilia would then either be pulled into, or she would reject and then be like, this is a problem. But none of them were used, so there was no tension. There were so many options in this novel for building tension and drama and suspect, but because the main characters were never allowed to be seen in that way by anyone, everything just deflates. And anytime the main character was suspicious of someone, you know that it was going to be a red herring, only for her to figure it out at the last minute because the villains actually just tell her, and the whole thing is supposed to be a misdirection. She doesn't need to do anything. Then there's also things like the forced makeup at the end, where the side characters come over to the MC again to spill because Luke doesn't want to, but because my friends don't hate you, so I guess I'll just tell you all of my secrets, even though I don't have to, even though because my friends like you, I don't actually have to like you. But everybody in this universe, to prove that they are good guys, have to accept the main character and like the main character and tell all of their secrets to the main character, because how else would this work? None of these relationships are realistic. None of these conversations are realistic. None of this is interesting. And everybody just loves the main character. Let people hate the main character if they want to, especially once she's ruined a wake, especially when she's come in and kind of crashed everything. Who cares? You don't have to confess. She's not the Pope. Second favorite section, Ben is a cuck. Just putting it out there. But this is where Alexa's work feels like it's going. After Ben sees Cecilia kiss Gabriel, it says, the narration says, "I'm baffled. Ben doesn't appear to be jealous or upset. Dear God, he's perfect." Giddiness rises up from my stomach. This is about Ben. I guess this is less about Ben and more about Cecilia, because Ben's a bad guy and courting Cecilia probably to get her in a false sense of security. And also, he's working for the murderous Grammy. But Cecilia is turned on by Ben cucking. That's a choice. I can't say that it's one that I'm into, but other people who are into harems, reverse harems, may be down for this, especially if it's where Alexa goes in the future. I super love monogamy though, so I can't stand this kind of crap. I can't stand the girl that toys with multiple boys' emotions, that treat boys as if they're just dildos, and don't consider the feelings of others. You'll see what I mean if you read literally any of my work and how I deal with relationships and what I do, but this is a personal preference. I hate it. You might not. The random hypocrisy of this book. So just because Cecilia's extra, she sits there thinking, Luke, do you really think that anybody would care who you're hooking up with, as she's trying to get him to give her information? Then, as he tells her who he's hooking up with, she judges him for the way that their relationship is, assuming that he's keeping it a secret because he's a jackass and not because Morgan asked him to keep it a secret, or because whoever he's banging asked him to keep it a secret. Like, okay, clearly you're a judgmental hoe, but okay. Getting to the ending, I cannot believe the whole thing closes out with 1, villain monologues, and 2, one of Cecilia's classmates tell the cops not to believe Ben, and they respond with, how do you know what he told me? The classmate says, it doesn't matter, and that's the end of that. Ben is arrested without evidence, but with the random mob just saying, believe us over him. Yeah. Hearsay from anyone is still hearsay, and you cannot press charges or convict someone on it. This is just so disappointing in like every way. This is your ending. Closing out what could have been, this story had all of the elements that it needed to make a compelling small town mystery, mixed with a girl grieving the loss of her mother and her inability to fit into a new place. A great parallel for 2 completely different plots that work together, the internal struggle and the external struggle. I wish that there was more interwoven in here about her grieving. I wish that there was more with her not fitting in with this town, and solving the murder had more to do with her finding her place and clearing her name, her family name, finding out the dark truth about her grandmother. But this book doesn't really go that deep, and it's not trying to, which is also fine. It can just be a candy book. It's just, there's no logic here, there's no depth here, and it was so cheap. Because there's no tension, the MC never is wrong, and Alexa has a propensity for making the older familial females or the straight white males the bad guy. It's happened in the 3 books that I've read so far. So you know that this is how, you know exactly where this is going to go when it starts. Now, knowing the ending isn't even necessarily a bad thing, because a lot of stories are like that, and you're going along for the ride. But you have to like the way that the author writes, the author's personality, and the points of view that they have. And this is obviously not the case for Alexa and me. Like I said, this will appeal to a certain type of reader, to which I am not. Those are all of my thoughts, or most of my thoughts on this book. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Have you read this book? Did you read this book? Will you read this book? Check it out for sure, and come back for the conversation. Looking forward to what you've got to say. With all that said, thank you so much. If you want an alternative book in October, keep an eye out for mine. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry. Flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?